it is now, where you spend $4 or $5 grand, get some reviews, and throw it up on Kickstarter and let it rip. So like I said, I always introduce myself, which basically means I've been doing this for a while. I've done strategy games, I've done children's games. I have not done like RPGs and miniature games and board games and things like that. We're going to talk about some of the different types of games and inspirations. I've written for games, so I collaborated on a big Dudes on Map and threw a lot of dice, wrote a novella, wrote all character introductions and things like that, so I've done that. You know, my current project, I collaborated with actually our first publisher to do a game that went up on Kickstarter last fall, to some November timeframe, called Extraordinary Voyages Pirates. That is, I think it's in pre-production right now. It should be coming out this summer. So a friend of mine, Glenn Drover, who was our first publisher, he and I collaborated on this game. It was originally a Jules Verne game, but turned into a Pirates game. So we'll talk about, you know, reusing tropes in games a little bit. So I do have, you know, as Suzanne said, we started a company, SDR Games, Steve, Don, and Ray, and then Mike came along. So it's now Steve, Don, Ray, and Mike, but he's the M in games, we figure. And we formed, I think, in 2004. We did it because we needed to write and sign contracts. So when we got into, I think, our second game, Kaya Chaos, which kind of brought some prototypes for show and tell afterwards, but we actually converted to an LLC, which basically means we're a partnership and a company, and we have a lot of fun with that too, because we're all MBAs, so we're always delegating work to each other. We're trying to figure out who's signing the expense reports, and you know, our employee handbook encourages abuse, and you know, we have a zero tolerance policy. We must give each other a hard time all the time. So anyway, I've got, I want to say 2 or 3 active projects going on with SDR Games. I also have a couple projects outside of SDR Games with some folks that I've worked with in the past. Don't tell Steve, right? Okay, good. For me, I do stuff like that because it helps me see different types of games. Because we with SDR Games, we all play a different role in that process. And we do kind of get stuck into a little bit of a rut designing the same game over and over. So I try to work with other people to get other ideas. It's like, okay, you know, he's breaking up the band. No, he's going on a solo project. No, that's just something we got together and said that sounded like a good idea. So it really, the whole thing, it started around game nights, and you know, back in 2002, 2003. You know, I'm an IT guy for the profession, so I sit around all day and really, you know, tense meetings. Doing a lot of emails, doing a lot of computer stuff. So Saturday night, getting together, being able to let my hair down, let her hair down, and have a few drinks, play some games. I found it was really kind of fun because I had played board games since I was a kid, right? I was a first edition D&D player. I used to get clobbered by the neighborhood playing the classics. So I never really realized this whole world that existed out there. It actually had gotten started over in Europe for a while there, and then came to the United States late 90s, early 2000s. So we kind of got in on it very early. I'm like, hey, I can make one of these. Everybody's like, no, you can't. Apparently, you know, several games later, I actually can. And that was just a confluence of us sitting around playing with games and having a good time. And you know, the whole concept of being just like totally disconnected from technology and you know, although there is a lot of technology in building games, particularly the way I typically work, but being able to sit around and have a drink and play a game, whether it's at the pub or with friends or what have you, we save the easier games for later in the night. So anyway, that's just kind of intro, like how I got here. I jotted down a couple of areas that I thought might be of interest to you. If I see people starting to doze off, you know, or somebody throws something at me or what have you, you know, cheers. You know, I should have got myself a bigger copy. So the 3 areas I was going to touch on tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of foundational type of stuff. And I know there's lots of books out there on game theory and gamification, which is a whole other story. But I want to talk about things that, you know, kind of resonate with me around basic core foundational ideas of games. I want to talk a little bit about the design process, and I know there's much magic and science and art to this as there is any type of process. Suzanne said things about resources and prototyping. I'm a big believer in prototype your way to a real game, but I've learned the hard way about some of that. And then finally, the thing that everybody always keeps wanting to know about is getting yourself published. I didn't set out to make $1 million at this, which is good because I'm never going to. For me, this has been more about something I can do, something I have fun with. It gives me an excuse to buy more games. It's allowed me to do things with my family. We do family events where we go off for a whole week and play games and things. I remember one of my games was inspired by me and my son canoeing together in Scouts. So it's stuff like that. Calling him over and letting him watch me sign my first board game when somebody bought it. Working for hours and hours for 30 cents a copy. It's the little things that really make it worth it. It's not about, at least not for me, particularly as a designer. I'm never going to get rich at this, and I don't think I really care about it. So, wasn't really sure I'd ever get published. Didn't really care about that either because this was just something I enjoyed doing. So, I've blown this up, so hopefully I can actually do this without glasses. But so, one of the things I want to talk about is just what are types of games out there. I mean, there are tons and tons of choices, and some of these things that in this part of the thing that I want to talk about here, the foundations. This really, if you're going about trying to build a game, these are the things that kind of, I call it foundations, but these are the types of things that shape your game and the design and the market and the audience. So, types of games, we talked about cooperative games, right? It's me against the game, or us against the game. The big popular one lately is Pandemic and the Pandemic Legacy, which you guys may or may not have heard about. But it's basically several people all trying to beat the game and the game trying to beat you. Those games also can be adapted, usually with a little bit of modifications into solo games. There's a big market for solo games because not everybody can get together with 4 or 5 people and play games. I've actually gotten into some solo-only games. One that I really enjoy is called Black Sonata. I picked it up off of Kickstarter. It was a print and play, and it's about it's kind of a hidden identity. You're chasing around 1600s London trying to collect some clues to figure out who the Shakespeare's mistress was. Now, okay, that doesn't sound exciting, but the mechanics are really cool because it's this hidden movement and you're collecting clues. So it's this mix of Scotland Yard and Mastermind. That guy got the blue pegs and the red pegs together. So anyway, solo games, competitive games, player versus player. There's all kinds of flavors of those. The standard is 3 to 5 players. We joke about that. We also like. We wanted to design games that had 6-player games because we were always played with our lives. Designing for 6 players is a lot more difficult than designing 3 to 5 players. There's 2-player games that are dedicated 2-player games. We call them couples games. So things like Lost Cities, Odin's Ravens, or a few of these other ones that are, me and my wife play at the pub, that kind of thing. And then there's all these other kinds of forms that are starting to come out, some of them new, some of them old. Big one lately is asynchronous, where Root and its predecessors Vast. Root is very popular right now. It's actually a war game, but it's you're playing woodland creatures all fighting with each other. But each race has its own strategy. One race in there, if you're the birds, you are trying to sow discontent. If you're the cats, you start out with ownership of a lot of different properties and you're trying to do things. So it's not a game where everybody does the same thing but differently and try to outdo each other. Everybody has a different role to play and you have to win using the conditions. One against all, things like Not Alone.
What was the name of the game you just mentioned?
Root.
And where do you find it? Through
The best place to find games these days, honestly, is Amazon.
Cool.
There's also something called BoardGamePrices.com, and if you go on there, it will do if you look for a particular game, it will do a scan of all the kind of the major websites, Cool Stuff Inc. There's just a whole number of different smaller online retailers, and of course, RIW, Pandemic, there's some nice friendly local game stores that encourage purchasing board games. So I usually do most of my shopping lately, much to my wife's chagrin, through Kickstarter. I find Kickstarter, and I'll mention this later, but Kickstarter is a great place where there's a lot of new and innovative stuff going on. The downside is unfortunately a lot of it's crap, so just say it. But One Against All, we've played one. We've played several of those lately. Scotland Yard is one of the old ones where I'm Mr. X and I'm trying to sneak around. Everybody else is trying to guess where I'm at. Hidden Identities, like Heinlein and Company, we used to play. Top Secret Spies, where you try to move around, you can't reveal who you are. And then we get into, this is one of the things from an SDR Games, we like that in co-opetition, we call it. It's basically a blending of cooperative games and competitive games. It's a co-op in the extent that you all are forced to work together to try to prevent the game from killing you. But in the end, there can only be one winner. So those are fun. Those are areas that we typically play in, but pub games, party games, social deduction games, and then kind of getting into the future of games. There's a lot of games now that are coming. Games with soundtracks or sound-driven, where you're waiting for things to happen on the soundtrack that's timing you. App-assisted games, and then I keep seeing a push for electronic game boards. Basically a television, touchscreen, be able to interact with your pieces and stuff. And that'd be good for a lot of bookkeeping. But those are the things those are the future games. There's a lot of people out there trying to do this stuff, but I'm like, that's not why I got in games in the first place. I got into it to try to disconnect from all that nonsense. I spend enough time on my phone as it is. I don't need to be, I do look up stuff during games. But anyway, point being is I'm still kind of the old school. I like the tactile. I like the feel of the cardboard. I like the linen finishes. I like the wooden cubes and the wooden bits and the smell of the box. And yes, I do read a Kindle, but I still like books. So one of the areas, so those are choosing the type of game, and if you're going down the path of designing for one type of game is significantly different than designing for something else. So some of these basic decisions kind of set you on a path that steer you in certain ways. One of the other things I want to talk about is conflict. And this is, we talk about the American school of games versus European school. The American school is very much a direct conflict. I'm going to attack you, right? I'm attacking you. So if you think about risk, I'm attacking your country, I'm going to move all my troops in, roll a bunch of dice, and I'm going to win. So it's very much, I'm directly conflicting with you, and I'm attacking you, and I'm going to try to take over, and there's a certain amount of luck with that. A European game, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. I'm going to make it more expensive for you to keep your army. I'm going to make it more difficult for you to travel over territory. I'm going to take the resources you need to keep you moving forward. So it's more of I'm not actually doing anything to you. I'm just making it more difficult for you to do what you need to do, right? So then the third piece of that is something like a hybrid, right? And that's kind of what we did with bootleggers. Hybrids, we're going to be blind bidding, we've got auctions, but I'm also rolling dice, and I'm going to play that take that card and shut down your speakeasy. So those are the fun things, of trying to mix and blend those two. But the American style is always the Ameritrash, fistful of dice, and the European is much more chess-like, passive-aggressive in some cases. So conflict leads me into interaction, and we joke about this sometimes. It's not a game, it's an activity. You don't want to, it's not an activity, it's supposed to be a game. And conflict is really, whether it's direct or indirect, is kind of the heart of a game, right? I don't like playing direct conflict games, but I do like the challenge of messing up somebody else's plan. So when you think about interaction, it's usually I have a strategy that I'm trying to accomplish, and somebody else has a strategy that they're trying to accomplish. And somewhere along the road, me trying to execute my strategy is going to make it more difficult for somebody else, right? So like novel writing. I have 3 different storylines, and if each of those 3 storylines never bump into each other, that's not very interesting. A game is the same sort of way. I want to win the game, but for me to get from point A to point B, I'm going to get in the way of everybody else trying to get from point A to point B. That is that interaction. You'll hear talk about interaction. The absence of that is what we jokingly call multiplayer solitaire or parallel play. There are games, however, so I'm like, oh, this is good, this is bad. There's actually a lot of really good games that are essentially parallel play. Classic being Yahtzee, roll and write. There's a new one out called Welcome To. They call it a flip and fill. Flip cards, everybody looks at the cards, they fill in their little map, and at the end of the game, everybody scores, and you see who wins. So, while I can say that you want to have interaction in games, there's other games that it's perfectly fine. What's fun about the Welcome To is you can play up to 100 people at the same time. Just pick your pad of paper. So we talked about conflict, different types of conflict. We talked about interaction. And then mechanics versus theme. Both of them are really important. Some people will start with mechanics, some people will start with theme. Mechanics, the rules of how you are essentially processing this. So if you think about it, it's like a process that you have at work for checking out a book. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. The problem is you got to do it in 45 minutes with 3 to 5 people, make it fun. But when you do a process, you cannot write rules for every possible situation, right? Well, what happens if it's a blue book? What if it's that? Or what if it's this other thing? So that's where I try to bring theme in, and if the theme is strong enough, people are smart enough to arbitrate the rules on their own. So if I've got a situation where I'm not really sure A versus B, well, thematically, I'm the gangster, I have more muscle, therefore I'm going to win that conflict. So, this kind of drifts over into work a little bit because I make that same concept at work. I try to design processes at work that are easy, intuitive, and understanding. And if you have a doubt as what you should do with some sort of special case, well, the objective of the process or the theme of the game should give you that guidance. So, when we work together in SDR games, we try to weave those 2 things together so that the mechanics kind of fit the theme. So, oh, well, this makes sense, this is something we have. But we also like to make choices about mechanics to try to achieve those as well. There's also times where you have to let abstraction take place. You cannot, I was trying to track the days of the year with a cube going down through whatever, and everybody can move certain ways. You can't get that fiddly. You abstract that. You go from here to here, that's one season. So there are situations where you can gloss over the theme to make the mechanics work as well. So it kind of comes back to theme versus mechanics, process versus objectives, right? And this is, again, the argument against kind of European games is they typically are very, very dry, and the theme is pasted on. All you have to do is look at about half of Ryder Knizia's games, and it's the same game with Egyptian theme and medieval theme and ancient theme and this theme. It's all basically some mechanic that it could be about anything, and it doesn't really matter. So what about us? SDR games. We talk about it. Where do we like to go on that? For me, we do like the co-opetition. I like U.S. history based because a lot of European games are set in Renaissance Italy and Egypt and these other places. I happen to like finding things here in the United States that are typically historical. So we've been working forever on something called Chilkoot Pass. It's a Eureka gold mining game in Alaska. Another one that I brought with me tonight is we started it in probably 2005, 2006. It's called Charleston Exchange. It's based on the commodities exchange in Charleston around the Revolutionary War era. So anything that I can dig in and do a little bit of history, a little bit of homework on, I enjoy that. Other things we do like in our games, and if you think about this like dramatic tension, you think about it like baseball. You know, every inning, you're kind of cranking up that tension, right? People getting on base, the next person coming up to bat, and then all of a sudden it kind of gets up to a certain point, and then it's struck out, and it's over. So having those moments where you can peak that excitement, that tension, and then drop it off, build it up and drop it off, and we did this pretty effectively, I thought, in Bootleggers. You're kind of getting everything all lined up, and everybody's getting it, and we've all played the card of each other. It comes time to sell the booze to the speakeasies, and somebody rolls a really crappy roll. So there's this whole build up, and then kind of this release of tension. Slingshots. And again, this is kind of an American thing. We like to be able to come from behind. A lot of times in the heavy strategic games, Euro games, there's no catch-up mechanism. If you don't know what you're doing, you're out in the first round. And I always joke about Settlers of Catan. If you play with somebody that's never played it before, they're going to lose, guaranteed, just because they don't know where to put their first part on the board. And after that, you're done. And then finally for us, theme. I'm the mechanics kind of a guy. Ray will envision the box and the colors. Mike is good to bounce off, and Suzanne's wife Steve is great fact-checking our rules and everything. So Ray is, I think, constantly trying to redesign diplomacy, and I'm trying to find the next new mechanic of, something new and innovative and something that hasn't been seen. So anyway, those are kind of the foundations, and those are things that, those are just stuff that I've found in the years and stuff that works for us. Things that I like. One other one I forgot to mention, the help you, help me, and hurt you, hurt myself. So sometimes the process of trying to help me get further down the river, I wind up bringing somebody else along with me. So it's those fun little things like that I look for in games that I always try to accomplish with our games. So anyway, time check. Okay, good. 20 minutes. Any questions over that before I jump into the next section? Yeah.
I have spent quite a lot of time with a bunch of the games that you've actually already mentioned, and I always...
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Settlers of Catan is a hateful thing. It's fun,
right.
but... And then I look at a game like Betrayal at Mansion on Haunted Hill, the longest name of all gaming history.
That's right. And I always get that screwed up with the Haunting of Hill House, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I... Anyway.
You should get the Scooby-Doo expansion. You get the little figures that are basically the Scooby-Doo characters. For those of you who don't know the game, it's really it's like a dungeon crawl or a crawl through an old haunted mansion, and crap pops up and kills you.
That's kind of the game engine, so to speak,
Right.
never really changes, but the rules for how that engine is going to function change depending on how far you get into it. Oh, scenario A.
Snacks is back. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So when they went and designed that, do you start with that game engine in mind that you're going to then go and manipulate 36 different ways to create 900 variations on the same game? Like, is that what you're thinking about personally when you're thinking about this stuff? Like, well, if there's this mechanism that has these counters and this slider, and if you roll that, then you pick up this card and...
So it's funny because I have a section, and boy, you want to come with me to like the next time I do this because you can play straight for me.
Take me.
I'll
pay you.
Blah, 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 blah. Oh, well, it's actually a little bit further down, but let's talk about it right now. Constructionism versus reductionism. So when I first started doing this, I was the same way. I'm like, oh man, I got all these really great ideas. You can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do that, and you can do these things, and you got to do this other thing over here, and it's Everdell, which, don't get me started. The problem with that is you get all that stuff in there, and you have this really complex system, and it's not going to work. I guarantee you it's not going to work. And you'll tinker with something over here, and these things will break over here. And then they'll tinker with this, and this will break over here. And then this will, so eventually you start throwing stuff away, and finally get it down to something that eventually you either get bored of or you can make work.
There are certainly a couple of permutations, I'm not to completely interrupt, but you play through it and you go, oh, I don't think you guys thought this one through all that well because
Yeah.
we all just got wiped in 9 minutes
Yeah,
once the
yeah,
game
yeah.
turned over.
Well, the converse of it though, and I think it's when you start going down the path of those complex games, and this was a learning experience I had working with Glenn on Extraordinary Voyages. He had a completely opposite approach to what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I thank him profusely since for showing me this new way. But he was more of a constructionist. It's like, let's get the core mechanic working, right? And EV or Extraordinary Voyages, was essentially a race. It's a race on 3 different lines, okay? It's a card-driven race. Let's make that work. Once we got that core mechanic working, then you can go on and embellish. Oh, we're going to collect treasures. Oh, we're going to trade those treasures in for this. You know, so I found that approach works a lot better. So something like a betrayal house on the haunted hill was probably a very simple concept to start, right? We're going to take a bunch of people, run them through a mansion that's going to evolve as we go. Oops, new card, oops, bad thing happens, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And once that core mechanic is worked out, I said, okay, well, what can we do with this? Well, we can have this type of adventure. We can do this type of adventure. Well, this weird, crazy thing can happen, and now this has to, you know, so we have to add this into the game as well. I found building up, you know, in my limited and humble experience, I find that so much easier than just trying to get all these ideas in a big bucket and trying to sort them all out. Now, if I was true to my engineering, yeah, it's a very complex system, and it's hard to make a complex system work and balance and play when there's so many moving parts to it. So we joke about this a lot. So there was also an underlying message in that, right? Working with other people, I learned different ways to do things. So sometimes collaborating with somebody outside the group thing team, you get to learn new things. Working with established designers, Glenn's been around a lot longer than I have, and been at it a lot longer than I have. So that was really kind of the nice thing for me. Typically, I usually start with a blank sheet of paper, a bunch of ideas and notes and stuff like that. And now I'm in that build-up versus
Focus that objective.
yeah, focus on the objective first and then elaborate afterwards. So I'm going to keep on with design sides of things. We talk about mechanics. There's a lot of different mechanics out there. There's a lot of really trendy things right now. The ones that are kind of like my old go-to and probably been around forever are auction mechanics. I bid 1, you bid 2, you bid 3, too much for me. Auctions are nice because they are kind of self-regulating. So when somebody starts collecting a lot of money, everybody starts bidding higher to try to get that guy to run out of his money faster. But there's also blind bidding where everybody draws a card face down and then you simultaneously reveal and whoever has the highest number gets to go next. So it's faster. And there's all kinds of variations around that. Worker placement's very popular right now. I have a limited number of workers. I place them on different spots on the board based on their placement. I take certain actions. Converse has action placement. I have places and I can tell them to do things. Dice placement, dice crafting, roll the dice, allocate out dice. Bag building, another way of randomizing things. Rondels, where you're moving around a limited set of actions and you can go 2 spaces or 3 and you can pay extra to go further to get the particular action you want to take. So it's a little bit about this whole action selection type of model. Engine building is something you hear about a lot. Engine building are things that build upon, you know, I get some basic resources. Those basic resources lets me buy a factory. I can build on that factory to make more resources. I just grow from there. The latest hot one in that space from Stigmeyer Games is Wingspan. You're basically birds and meadows, and the more nests you have, the more birds you have, the more eggs you lay, the more birds you have, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I think it was designed with a certain amount of solo play. They like to have robot players, so you can play by yourself. The downside of it is it starts to look a little bit like parallel play and solo. You know, what I'm doing is really not affecting anybody else's actions. You know, I may get that bird faster than you, but there's 2 other birds that are just as good. So there's a lot of mechanics. There's also kind of like I've referred to the typical three-tier system. There's an injection of raw materials. There's a conversion of those raw materials to a finished good. There's a conversion of those finished good to either money or victory points or what have you. And then there's lots of ways that you can optimize that. I can buy bigger factories. I can buy bigger markets. I can skip the market, factory altogether and sell directly to the market. So we play around a lot of times with three-tier systems. My point is, where this is heading is do your homework. If you have not made yourself aware of, if you are interested in games, game design, and just games in general, Board Game Geek is probably the #1 source for anything related to games. It's got every game known to man. It carries the hotness list. They've got forums. You can pretty much pull down any set of rules that you ever want. Pull those rules down, read them. Everything's categorized and sorted by mechanic types and so forth. Yeah, yep, good back.
What was the name of that again?
Board Game Geek.
Board
Yeah.
Game Geek.
Yep, all one word. Board Game Geek.
Thank you.
Shorthand is BGG, but Board Game Geek is a library of all games. And it's a lot of submissions, pictures, artwork, all the rules. Like I said, all the stats, rankings, ratings, forums. So when I first got started, I was out on a website and they said, oh, if you like this game, try these other games. Well, there's a lot of that in game design. It's like, well, I like this particular type of game. I might like these others, so I'll go and I can pull a PDF of their rules, read the rules, and go, okay, I get it. This sounds good. So the point about this is I've talked to people that are like, oh, I'm going to go design this type of game. Well, you realize there's 4 other of this types of games out there right now. Well, it'll be different. It'll use this type of asymmetric hand management, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, well, you do realize there's about 8,000 games that do exactly that. So try to find ways to differentiate yourself. Do your homework, do your homework, do your homework. Spend time studying other games, play lots of games. There's a lot of, run 2 game nights that nobody ever shows up at, which is fine, because I like playing games by myself. Read a lot of rules, a lot of little game conventions here locally. There's a lot of places that run game nights and things like that. Look at what are the trends in mechanics. What are the hot trends right now? What are the tired trends? What are the hot themes? I had taken Chillicothe and turned it into a steampunk game. The problem was there was about 800 other steampunk games hitting the market all about the same time. I was like, man, I'm not going to get into that. So, like I said earlier, take a look at Kickstarter. Kickstarter has a lot of innovation going on. Yes?
So you said it's a lot, maybe like 800 games outside of the one that you thought you had going.
Yeah.
How did you do your search?
Typically, like I said, I'll stay on the Geek and I can look at, Board Game Geek will categorize by theme, they'll categorize by type of game, they'll categorize by the number of players. I look at the top 10 games, they have something called the hotness, which is the kind of buzzworthy types of games.
Did you patent what you did, or?
Nope. That's interesting because I did, when we get into talking about contracting, things like that, typically you don't patent anything. Patenting, I've seen some game designers out there, they're like, well, we've patented this unique ability to draw cards from a little plastic coffin. Okay. You can certainly copyright things, and we do that. I mean, affixing the name at the bottom says this is my copyright. That's one way of copyright. You can also send it off to USTMPO and do that type of thing. And I know you guys have talked about that, but think of it like music, right? You hear something, you're inspired by something, and then you go and do your own little riff on that. That's kind of the nature of the game design industry. It's not so much. So at first I had a lot of people comparing my game to El Grande. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of that. But you know what? El Grande is one of my favorite games, so great. So there's good comparisons and there's bad comparisons, right? So in a year where there's now something like 5,000 new games hitting the market every year, it's kind of hard to be unique. So like I said, it's challenging sometimes. Like, somebody was talking about, I want to do a national parks theme. Well, I could name 3 national park games off the top of my head that have been published in the last 3 years. It's just because I'm swimming in this stuff every day.
How did you find your publisher to go with you?
How do I find the publisher on that one? That's a good question. And I'll come back to that. Put a pin in that, because the whole publishing thing is
I
a
wear
big
glasses.
deal. What's that?
I wear glasses, can't put a pin in it.
It's like getting a sharp stick in the eye. I've done that too, trust me. It's not fun. I did it twice. Well, we can talk about publishing, but let's hold off on that for a little bit.
Can we circle back to, you mentioned the theme of steampunk, because I know steampunk, and I don't think the room knows it, so this is what I'm hoping but the room doesn't know steampunk.
Sorry.
But steampunk is an exciting trend, and it was used as the theme a year or two ago for First Robotics. I think 2 years ago, First Robotics, it was a challenge theme that was based on that.
Right.
So could you expound, just to explain a little bit to the room and the interface for us?
Okay, sure. It also happens that I've actually written a steampunk western novel, a bunch of short stories. So steampunk is a little close to my heart. Steampunk is what is considered what they call retrofuturism. Retrofuturism is, how did the Victorian era imagine the future would be, right? So the Victorian era thought everything like flying cars were going to be run by steam engines. So steampunk is really, if you think about Jules Verne and some of those classic, I consider that, steampunk 1.0. You get into the 70s where you have Jeter and Moorcock and some of those other authors. Steampunk has taken on the brass goggles and the top hats and everything that's driven by steam and ray guns and things like that. The running gag is, and it was actually, I think it was coined by Jeter or one of the other, Michael Moorcock, it's basically steampunk is when the goth kids discovered the color brown. So there's a lot of cosplay, a lot of costumes, a lot of brass goggles and stand-up tropes like that. So, and it's interesting because I want to kind of talk about that, like ideas, because there are tropes out there that you can work with. Like a steampunk game is going to have, dirigibles, it's going to have sometimes monsters if it's weird, and there's certain things. Pirates will always have treasures, cannons, crewmen, ships sailing around, right? Zombie games, how many zombie games are there out there? There's a lot of zombie games out there. Get to the chopper, the zombie side. The interesting thing about those games, and I say this because we're coming out with a pirate game, is how do you bring something new to it? So even though there are 100 zombie games out there, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do a zombie game. You have to put a fresh spin on that, right? Maybe it's a zombie love story. The pirates are I don't know, you can, there are games where if you're buying an Egyptian game, there's going to be pyramids and sphinxes and scarabs in it. What you do with that basic material and how you construct a game out of that and make it fun and different and fresh is what is the challenge, right? So yeah, okay, there may be 18 different national park games out, but if you're the national park game that comes out with a big binder of all the national parks and you do a lot of research, people like that type of thing. So where do ideas come from? For me, it's like asking an author where do your ideas come from. It could be pretty much anything. Licensed IP. So there's games that are coming out. A good friend of mine, Andy Parks, did 300, the board game. It's about Spartans killing each other. But that was a licensed IP.
Can you find that
On the Geek, probably.
Board Game Geek?
You can find everything.
So
on
you
Board
just
Game
Google
Geek.
300 on that website?
Yep, and it'll come back with.
And that's your friend?
Yeah, Andy Parks, yeah. I met him, it's really funny. I met him back when he was, he and I were I was more of a nobody than he was. I'm still a nobody, and he's doing things like Star Wars Attack Wing and all kinds of really phenomenal stuff. I think he just has more energy than I do.
Don, with this, do you want to explain a little bit about Kayak Chaos? How that theme, how that
Sure.
that path? Because that's going to be.
Yeah. So Kayak Chaos.
You mentioned it before. You mentioned stuff with your son.
Yep. So Kayak Chaos. Where did that come from? It was something that I started, it was the idea of chasing, racing down the river with my son. And so the game comes with cards, and it was originally canoes, but it comes with kayaks, right? And the whole idea is you're navigating your way down a set of river tiles, playing cards, moving yourself down. Now where it gets interesting is, and this is where we talked about abstraction, well, when the wind blows, what happens? Does your kayak move sideways? No, I move the river sideways. So, and if the water gets rough, I turn the river tile around. So I'm abstractly taking kind of mechanics into that and having a little fun with the theme. Just for fun.
But you originally had the canoe race, right?
Yep.
And then was it the publisher who suggested?
Yeah, so this is where it gets interesting. John gets into show and tell. The original game was on a pack of cards that I sat at Borders one time waiting to play Yu-Gi-Oh! With my son, and I drew up cards. So this is what the cards looked like originally. And the river was actually, just showed you, well, that's how you turn a river. But the river was actually cards this was a river tile. It was originally a card.
Is that the ace of clubs?
Yeah. So that was originally started out as looking like this. After the contract was signed, the publisher said,
Hold them both up, just like that. Because in this instance, do you see how an inventor gets that flash of genius?
yeah.
Where he takes an everyday object and just puts his vision into it through his creativity?
So now you have move your canoe sideways. Those now look like, that's a forward card. And then the side-to-side card and things like that. So really, the design was here. That was an early prototype, excuse me. The next level prototype was something that looked like that, or actual cards. The rules were actually in here. Here's this, push the tiles side to side. When I got this, and there's a rather lengthy story of how this actually got sold, involved the cigar box and cleaning out somebody's office. But ultimately, it got signed, and then we got into development. We'll talk, I've got some points on this a little bit further on, but when you sign a contract, game goes into development. It's similar to like an editor working with a book, right? Their point is to try to make it better. There was two changes that the developer suggested. One was, don't have the cards in your hand. Get those cards out of your hand, make them tiles. And then the second thing is they threw in a life preserver that you could play out a turn and say, I don't like what you're going to do to the river, stop that. Those are the only two changes the development made, and they ran it by me, and I said, yeah, that's brilliant. And they went with that, and this has probably been one of our most commercially successful games. So, yeah.
You actually just pointed or touched on something that I was really curious about. So your deck of regular 52 deck of cards,
Yeah.
I apparently don't know how to speak English anymore. Essentially, that was a skinless version of an engine. Essentially, there wasn't anything to it outside of, there are rules here, and then we'll kind of paint it as we go along. And then obviously, now there's an entire box with several decks and things. Now that obviously came later down the road, but the mechanism that you had started fooling around with initially, I mean, did that point itself directly to becoming an aquatic transportation game?
Well,
or
no, because it started as
whatever it was.
It started as a canoe race, and it was just, I went and tried to find the pieces and parts around me to be able to construct a game.
Okay.
And the resource you have available now, if you're going to build games and prototypes, is just astounding. But back in my day, it was laser printers onto stickers peeled and stuck on cards, which is a great idea until you get a stack of 70 of them, and then they all kind of bow because those stickers start taking up space. Ironically, Sharpie on standard playing cards sucks. It ruins the Sharpies and everything gets all blurry really quick. We did, back in the day, we did, print your own business card types of stuff, right? Now, I've taken it a whole nother step, and everything gets printed out on the laser printer before I go pro. It gets printed, cut with the paper trimmer, and then sleeved. So, okay. The key is, and I also do things like, this is what I'm working on recently. My prototyping is blank cards, which you can now buy in bulk. Colored Sharpies and one of your classic green stencils. It's amazing what you can do with those. So you can generate all kinds of cards very quickly. My handwriting sucks, so I tend to do a lot of stuff on the computer, and I can just print it out, run it through the clippers, drop it in sleeves, and I'm done. The trick with prototyping is, and I learned this very early on, I would spend hours and hours and hours coming up with the most elaborate and beautiful prototype.
I mean, Don would come with these wonderful boards
Exactly.
that he would make with
Abs-
foam core.
And,
he'd go to
oh, it's just
Michael's.
fantabulous. Problem is, the game would last about a minute and a half before it coke-screwed into the side of the mountain. It was just a complete train wreck. And then, of course, the zero tolerance policy for abuse would kick in. Like, what the hell were you thinking? What is this piece of crap that you just brought us? You know. So I would get all kinds of abuse. So I learned very quickly, or maybe not as quickly, the first prototype is going to look like crap.
Yeah.
Because you'll care, right? You just want to get the ideas on the table, and you want to work with it, right? So you start with a handful of cards. You know, stuff you've stolen from other games, things that you can write on with Sharpies, toys, plastic cubes. Woo! Sorry, I forgot to close the bag. Cubes, you name it. It's whatever you can smack together to get it working. Then you move into using prototypes and stuff. Yeah.
So do you take that rough draft prototype with all this stuff that you pulled from other games and all that, do you take that to the publisher?
No.
Or do you take something more elaborate like she was just saying?
It takes a couple more iterations. So what I typically do is I'll do a lot of this stuff by hand, and I can get pretty elaborate with things. But the next step in all this is typically a lot of, I want to pick these up so you don't step on it. Plus I have these precisely numbered. There's exactly 30 orange cubes. Now there's an orange cube. Whole game. Just kidding. No, I usually go through several iterations of prototypes just to get, and I'm trying to learn how to do it by hand, because doing it all on the computer is still very labor intensive. Then I'll do it on the computer, and then there's places I can send it for like a kind of a professional finish. I find that when it comes to where along the line the publisher sees one of those, is it's usually after the play testing, and I usually take a nice finished prototype to a play test, right? Because we were play testing Extraordinary Voyages a couple of years ago, and I had made the lines the wrong color, right? So every time I play test with somebody, they're like, oh, these lines are not dark enough. I can't read those. It should be red. I'm like, okay, it's just a prototype. Move on. Next group of people come and play. Yeah, you know, I'm having a real issue with these lines. I'm like, I get it. It's just a prototype. Move on. When it comes to publishers, the first thing they want to see is the rules. They know you want to see a prototype. If they want to see a prototype, then they'll ask for a prototype. But typically, I've seen people submitting all kinds of stuff. I don't make fancy prototypes for the publishers. I make it for my playtest, particularly public playtest. Because the better the prototype I can make for playtesting, the less nonsense it invites. Because I really want them to give me feedback on the game and how it plays, not whether my colors on my board are the wrong color. So anyway, I've been throwing a few things out here. Nice. We didn't talk about elegance, but again, this is where you get into things like, complexity. How many decisions do you have to make on how many choices you have? And that's usually tied to the age range of the games. So if I'm going to do an 8 and up game, I'm going to have something like 1 or 2 easy decisions I have to make, and maybe 1 or 2 choices to make. But if I'm doing a 12 and up game, I have usually 7 or 8 choices to make, 3 or 4 choices to make, and 8 or 10 decisions that I have to cover. So when we talk about prototyping, getting it together like this is really important, because you're really gonna, you can sit around and a bad habit of doing this with my colleagues. We talk about whether something will work or won't work. You know, well, if you do this, that'll happen. If you do that, this will happen. You know what? What ends all arguments? Put it on the table and play it. You know, and I've been wrong many times. And okay, well, I'm usually wrong. But you know, you can talk about games in abstract, but you really have to put the prototype together, play the prototype, figure out what's wrong, tweak the prototype, and keep going. Going back to the same conversation, start your design small and build outward from there. Yeah, come on.
I'm sorry, every meeting I make too much noise. Okay.
I did well with Q&A, by the way, thanks.
In terms of prototyping, immediately my mind goes back to the late 80s, early 90s classic Mousetrap.
Yeah.
Anybody remembers Mousetrap? That's, I don't know.
1960s?
Was it?
Yeah, it goes
I have
both
no
ways.
idea. Because that was a game developed for rocket scientists and they sold it to children.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible. But the question I suppose that I've got then is like, that game literally builds a physical mechanism.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it may just be the market making sure that that doesn't happen anymore. But like, they must have gone through a patent process to build all of that stuff, to do the thing, to have the boot that comes down with the
Probably.
interference mechanism that tells you the time.
But you want to know something? If somebody else came out and built another game just like that, nobody would ever buy it. They're like, this is a big rip-off.
Yeah, it's
of this
insane.
other game. So why do you need to go through all the effort and hassle of trying to trademark the boot that kicks the routes that does the job thing? And honestly, did anybody ever play that game where you just build
No,
the thing?
no one ever played
Never
it
played the
properly.
game.
You just build it and do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I built it, I played it, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm like, there's a game here? So here's the thing, this could get really out of hand real quick. I attended a seminar by Michael Gray, who's one of the heads of product at Hasbro or one of these companies. He says, you know, we haven't produced a new game in 30 years. Everything is the Hannah Montana game or this, that, the other thing. You know,
the version.
yeah, it's another flavor, another version of some crappy mechanics. And all the games, he said, had to be, you know, you remember the old boxes where they had the rules on the inside of it? It had to be read and understand by the average 50s housewife that was too busy and wanted to give the kids something to do. That's why I always thought Mousetrap was brilliant, because you never had to read the rules. Just give them a box of shit and let them go.
It's like Legos.
It's like Legos, with less pain at night when you step on it.
I don't know.
Anyway, yeah. So when you get into the prototyping and the playtesting, there's all kinds of really weird things that start happening. Runaway leaders, like the guy that makes 800 grand in one move, and you're like, oh, what? And the converse of that is the left behind players. You know, I'm usually the guy that's bringing up the rear, usually losing all the time, and that's actually a good sign of how we know that it's time to show this game to a publisher, is if I start losing pretty regularly. Because if I'm winning, the game's broken. And it's usually because, and my argument is, in my defense, I'm analyzing the situation, making notes, and trying to make it better. The bullshit is usually me not just drunk and not paying attention. So games can be too tight, not enough resources. We were playing MMR, Mad Moon Rising, and it's just like every turn, I'm like, I get one thing. Another horrible thing is the games are too long. I remember our initial prototypes, they were like for 3 hours, we've gotten through the first 2 turns. Now granted, we argued about the rules every step of the way, but no rational person is going to play 2 turns of a 6-turn game in 3 hours, you know, it's just not going to happen. And then other, like my point peeve is waiting to the very end to know whether you're winning or not. You know, we joke about that being the point salad approach, right? Some of the games where you get all the way down, it's like, oh, I had 3 horses, that gives me 5 points. I had 6, oh, you know, it's like, So prototyping and playing it is the best way of finding out the flaws of the game. Yes?
Once you've play tested with your family and friends, everybody
Yep.
know.
Where do you go next?
Yeah, where do you go next? To get some real
Absolutely.
constructive criticism.
Yeah, you know, the standard trope is don't, the standard saying is don't play test with your friends and family. Because they're like, oh, this is the greatest game ever, right? Not my family. You know, I played Bootleggers with my 9-year-old, who's now 23, by the way. He beat me, and I spent the rest of the weekend listening to, "I'd be dead in his own game, I'd be dead in his own game." So sometimes playtesting with family is good. Most of the time, it does not provide you any valuable and productive feedback. So there are places where you can go to playtest. Some of the game nights are playtest friendly. There's a game designers meetup out of Ann Arbor that goes on. Right in our backyards here in June or July is something called Protospiel. Protospiel. I helped host it one year. It was started by a couple designers, most notably probably you'd recognize Dominic, the guy that did Wits and Wagers that you see at Target. I actually play tested that at a Protospiel a gazillion years ago when it was still film tabletop and poker chips and things like that. So Protospiel is organized playtest. If you go to Origins, Gen Con, WinterCon, DragCon, all these cons, any place where they have games, they usually have Unpub there. Those I don't really like because designers actually have to pay to play, and then all the citizens come in and play. I sometimes sucker friends in. The downside of organized playtesting like that is when they play test your game, they feel obligated to give you feedback. I mean, they're like looking for problems. So I come back from a Protospiel with like 8 pages of notes, and we'd sit down as a team and go through it like, yeah, that's BS. Yeah, oh, no, I would never do that. Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, but it's still stupid. You know, so the problem with playtesting is not fun for people. It's about looking for flaws, providing feedback, and you have to be cautious about the type of feedback you get and what you choose to adopt that works well in the game. But like I said, there are organized opportunities in the area, like I said, lots of even getting together with other game designers and playtesting. Friends and family is still a good place to work. It works well for us because there's 4 of us. We get together and we have an immediate playtest, and we are pretty brutal and we are pretty experienced at it. But I'd like to take it then to other places and have them play it. The other type of playtest, which will usually happen, sometimes it's a good idea to do it before you show it to a publisher. Sometimes the publishers will do it as well. It's called blind playtesting.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Blind playtesting. It's not for people that are sight impaired, as they would suggest. I have a seeing problem, so I can figure out how to say it. It is basically giving a prototype and the rules to somebody that has never played it, and you basically have to sit on your hands and watch. They have to read the rules, interpret the rules, and play the game. And that gives, a lot of times publishers will do that anyway themselves, but I've sent prototypes off that I don't think I adequately blind tested, and they send me back a whole bunch of feedback. I'm like, where'd that come from? You know, obviously they didn't understand the game. You know, they get 100 games a week and go through it as quickly as possible. Does he do this like every meeting? Okay, good. If that was just, well, disappointed, it's not material, but.
Well, you touched on another interesting thing about target demographics to whom you are designing a game. Have you ever run into a situation where your focus group turns out to simply be the wrong focus group?
Yeah.
Or you go, oh wait, no, this is much better suited as like an 8 and up game, but as it turns out, it's really not all that fun for anybody older than that, but it's a heck of a lot of fun if you tweak things a little bit and give it to younger kids.
Yeah.
Or whatever direction.
So I'm going to jump forward into the publishing, and that comes back to do your homework number 2, right? What is your target audience? What's the age ranges of that target audience, and what other games does that publisher publish that your product
Oh,
may fit?
so shopping the publisher then as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I spend a lot of time going to Origins and networking and talking to people and playing their crappy prototypes and get a chance, submissions that the publisher goes, I'm going to play this. So you get to know which publishers publish what type of game. Like, I'm not going to sell this type of a game to this type of publisher because it doesn't fit anything in their product. Yeah. At the end of the day, you can have the most brilliant game whatsoever, but it's not about how cool or how good your game is. It's whether the publisher thinks they can make money on it. I mean, That's the bottom line. They don't care whether this is your life's work and your magnum opus. If they think they can make $49.95 a game on it, they're gonna buy it from you. After that, don't care, right? So that's where you're talking about publishing. You know, do you want to publish it yourself? If you can't shop it, you can't sell it. Do you publish it yourself? There's lots of routes for that. There's, you know, print on demand types of things through Game Crafter and Print Play Productions. I design the game, I put it up there, people go buy it, they print a copy and send it to them. Ridiculously expensive, but it's a route to go. Kickstarter, obviously, and that's a whole other topic. If that ever interests you, good luck. Kickstarter has evolved over time now to become kind of a very sophisticated marketing tool. If you put a game up on Kickstarter that doesn't have finished rules, finished artwork, you know, that type of a thing, it's just going to languish. So there's very high expectations going on Kickstarter these days. Kickstarter also looks too much like my day job, so I would never want to do that.
But you did the one, right? So you want to explain?
Well, I've ridden along on the sidecar and kibitz the whole way, but I didn't have to. There's a lot of other things that most people don't realize. You've got to get into fulfillment. Okay, so you just sold this game to 50 different countries all around the world. Where are you going to put your shipping containers into the water? And then everybody always forgets about Chinese New Year, where every factory in China shuts down for a month, and everybody in Kickstarter goes, "But you promised us our game in April." Well, no, it's going to be June now. So, but like I said, self-publishing versus pro, plenty of print play, print on demands, Kickstarter. There's contests you can enter in. Yes, sir.
Is there like a limit on how big the board game should be?
No.
Want to be successful or not?
Well, the limit is on weight. Weight ties directly to shipping costs. So when you're looking at the type of game that you're constructing, it's a lot of times it's the amount of components and the number of cards and the overall weight of the game and the manufacturing complexity of it. So I can have big sprawling boards. There are limits, of course, where somebody has a board that's too big for the table. I know Gordon's done that several times. Railroad Tycoon is the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
You have to buy a bigger table for it. But in reality, a lot of it is driven by the mechanics around printing, publishing, and shipping, basically. Shipping overseas in containers, even bulk, is still very expensive. And it's interesting that, particularly with the Kickstarter campaigns, where if it goes up another half an ounce, it raises the entire cost by $10,000. You know, so it's just shipping makes a lot of difference. So we try to really be really sensitive to how many components and how heavy those components are. Dice are extremely heavy. So that's why you see smaller and smaller dice and things. So,
Doug?
I think we're in the Q&A section, because I don't know how long we have. I could do this for another 2 hours. It's like beer and board games. How can you get any better?
Another question.
Yeah.
Let's say you have the name and the concept of the game,
Right.
but you need help on the design and how it's going to function.
Right.
Because it might be like a little more too complicated to just figure out on your own.
Right. Right.
So is there like a company that will help NDA just do a partnership?
I think you need to hire him.
I haven't. There was a company a while back that would do that. The name escapes me. It was like the Game Cabinet or something like that, where it was almost like an incubator for board games. And they would go to conventions, they would put your games up, and they would help you through that whole process of design, build, and things like that. Generally speaking, it's usually, you know, some poor designer like myself or a small group of people that put these things together and pitch them to publishers. I haven't seen a company that helps do that development, at least not that I've seen in recent memory. So,
He loves you. He
I
absolutely
know,
loves
right?
you.
Would you call yourself then R&D&D?
That's
I'm gonna go home.
So no, I was, so funny thing, I was a first edition player. And one of the guys that I work with, have a couple projects going on, his name is Keith Bloom. He's the nephew of the Bloom brothers that basically effed up TSR back in the days. So I give him crap about that. So Keith is a good friend of mine, and we have a couple projects working on it together. So for me, you know, just I'll start wrapping things up here. The gaming has allowed me to do some really crazy and fun things. We were just talking about this. We got invited. Our first publisher did the before online poker was a thing. They did computer-based poker. So we got invited to a charity poker tournament with Andy Duke
In Chicago.
In Chicago at the pier, one of the big ships type of thing. I got to meet Larry Harris, who designed Axis and Allies. A whole nother world of that's a whole other story in itself. I've met Bruce Shelley, who you will never have recognized, but he was at Microprose with Sid Meier and worked on things like Civilization, Railroad Tycoon, and I was such a fanboy. Quick story with that, we were all playing a prototype of Age of Empires, the Galactic Rebellion version, and I had built the prototype for Glenn, and we were at his house. And I took a really nasty move and took something that the artist, you know, Paul wanted. Oh man, that was a really screw move, right? Sorry about that, right? So Paul just bitched about it for the rest of the game. But halfway through the game, I get up and I trot out to the kitchen. I'm in the fridge looking for another Allagash. I'm, hey, what happened to the Allagash? From the dining room, Bruce Shelley. Like I said, he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I took the last one of those. The Larry Harris story is another really good one I have to share. I was working with a bunch of guys. They're like, "Oh, I've been playing Axis and Allies since I was, you know, in pajamas." I'm like, "Listen," I said, "Glenn just signed Larry Harris to do a remake of Conquest of Empires. I'm going to Origins. I'm going to be hanging out with Larry Harris the entire weekend. I'm getting the inside track." He said, "Oh no, come over. We'll teach you how to play Axis and Allies. We're just going to pummel you." I'm like, no, seriously. I'm hanging out with the designer of Axis and Allies. I've designed games. I know there's always the inside track. There's a little secret that he's going to know. He's going to tell me, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to humiliate you playing Axis and Allies since you were in your pajamas. So I went, and Larry Harris was never to be found. A weekend, Saturdays. Finally go out to dinner with him. I'm sitting there, and I finally work up the nerve. I said, "Okay, Mr. Harris, I got a grudge match lined up with somebody who's going to school me in how to play Axis and Allies, and I know there's got to be an inside track. There's got to be a secret to this." I said, "What is it? What is it?" He goes, looks at me, goes, "Play the Germans." I'm like, "That's it?" He goes, "Yeah, that's what I did. Play the Germans." So I don't know if I have to elaborate on the remainder of this story, but it goes something along the lines of Don getting his humiliated horribly, and then not hearing the end of it for the next 6 to 9 months. And I think if I brought it up with that guy, he'd probably still remind me about it 10 years later. But anyway, that's fun stuff. Yeah?
I don't know if you can talk a little bit about licensing.
Sure. Licensing. When you go into selling a game, there's usually 2 different ways that it happens. You either sell the game outright, so you basically relinquish all rights to the game, or you license the game. Typically, with a licensing agreement that involves royalties, and royalties can be paid in a couple different ways. They can be paid as they accrue, or you can get an advance on royalties. I like the advance on royalties because, and the publishers often like that, because they just write you a check up front. Here's the money. And you still retain rights to and then every quarter when you get your royalty statement, you find out that you made $6 more on that game. That's great. It gets deducted off if you've already been paid. Selling it outright, which I've done as well, and I'm hoping it works out well. I sold off my rights to a particular game in return for a cut of the profits on the backside of the game. Now I have to actually trust the guy that I wrote the deal with. Doesn't have
Now, bootleggers, though,
Yeah.
you guys retain the license, which is
bootleggers.
good.
So this is a good point. So
That's their first
licensing.
game. So.
Licensing is a really, really important thing. It's very contractual.
Hey, pick up. You got bootleggers, right?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yep. This is my lovely beat-up copy. We wrote a contract for bootleggers that said, if the company ever goes out of business, we get the rights back.
Cool.
Which, I think that was one of the things I suggested. Solvency. There's a couple things. So when you sell a game, you're not really selling the game in this case. You're licensing the use of that intellectual property, right? So the publisher will do all the artwork. Paul did this, he was fantastic. He'll pay for all the molds, pay for all the sculpts. We get to review and finalize the rules. But ultimately, it's still your story, right? It's like a book deal, right? You know, they aren't, that story is still yours. They're just doing all of the editing and the publishing. So there's a couple of clauses that we always have in our contracts. It says, if after 5 years you're not printing it, the rights revert back to us. If you go out of business, the rights revert back to us. So we had a situation with Kayak Chaos where they wrote us in advance. The 3 years, I think it was like 5 years, came up and they weren't ready to reprint it. So I said, well, can we amend and extend and write you another advance? I'm like, sure. So they've actually paid to retain the rights of the game. So we've already paid for it. We don't collect any royalties because it's already in the bank. So yes.
What if the company sells their business to a third party?
It's a very good point.
Do you
that's
get
also
can
in
you
the
get a
contract.
percentage of?
No, the rights revert back unless the new company wants to cut a new deal with me. This
Yeah,
is a situation we ran into.
Good example is Ring Doorbell. They sold their business
Yeah.
for $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So you could make a lot of money potentially if you have some kind of a
I still haven't figured
agreement.
that part out. You know the old joke is how do you make a small fortune in board games? Start with a big fortune. So case in point, something sort of similar-ish happened with bootlegs. Eagle Games went out of business. They had sold maybe 3,000 copies, so there was still another 7,000 copies. The company went up for auction. All the assets of the company got bought, but at that point, the rights for bootleggers have been kicked back to us. So the new owner had 7,000 copies of bootleggers. So we say, hey, you owe us royalties. They'll say, no, we don't owe you royalties. We just bought the games. We don't owe you. Like, okay, well then that means obviously that.
Bought 7,000
Yeah.
copies of my game, you still owe me that money.
Well, no, they said they bought the game. I said, okay, that's so fine. So in reality, the intellectual property belongs to us, right? Fine. So now I have another publisher comes along, Mayday Games, and they said, hey, we'd like to reprint. This is great. The guy that bought the 7,000 copies is like, oh no, you can't do that. I'm like, oh yes, we can. You either owe us royalties for all the 7,000 games, or we own them, or own the game and we can reprint it. Which is it going to be? They're like, okay. So we had a little bit of fun with that one, but
When Eagle published, or the game maker Eagle went into, closed down, did they go into bankruptcy and the assets were sold for pennies on the dollar?
basically, yeah.
How much did those 7,000 games, was there a line item accounting that was associated with it?
Because at that point, it was assets of the company, the rights reverted back to us, so we weren't
So it
privy
was
to
just
it.
the IP rights that were.
Yeah, so I get the IP rights. Now, when Mayday came to us and they said we wanted to reprint that, we also owned all the artwork at that point too, because when Eagle went out of business, we talked to the original designers, the artists, Paul and Jacoby, who did the graphic arts. We were able to buy the artwork and the assets from them and reuse all that stuff. The molds, there was some sort of hokey business that went on between Mayday and Eagle, the new owners of all the assets. But the bottom line is when you do these contracts, you got to protect yourself in there. They're going to ask you to warrant the material as being your own. In other words, you didn't steal it, copy it, or plagiarize it, or something like that. There's mutual indemnification stuff that you agree to protect that, and they agree to protect you. But a lot of it really still boils down to what is the scope of your license? Is it bootleggers, and is it every derivative associated with bootleggers, like t-shirts, hats, and all that? Or is it just the game itself? Is it US only rights, is it global rights? And then to what extent do you have say in the design and approval of the design? We had a game taken one time, we were under contract, and in the context of development, the game went way off track, and completely away from the vision that I had for the game. And we basically said, no, you can't publish that, it's no longer our game. So having rights over, final approval rights, a lot of times the companies will give you that without having to have it in contract. Art direction is usually not up to you, but they'll sometimes consult with you as well. All right, I got 3. 1. No, it's these 2 times. Okay. Nope. Yes.
Hi. Just want to say I'm sorry for being late, but I
That's
have
all right.
parties to do and whatnot. Hard time trying to find this location and the room. So,
And stay
my
down.
question is, if you agreed on a licensing deal, how can you determine whether or not the amount of money that they offer you is a fair amount?
It's a good question. If they're purchasing the game outright, it's hard to say, right? Licensing usually runs in a small number of percentages, right? So if you're an unpublished designer and it's your first signing, you may get 1.5%, 2%. If you're a standard, 1%, 1.5%. If you're an established designer like myself, I may get 2 or 3%, 2%. And if you're a famous top-line designer, you may get 3 to 5%. So it just really, a lot of times it depends, again, on if you got a name, like if Reiner Knizia sells a game to Simply Fun, he's going to get a much higher percentage because it's Reiner Knizia, not whatever this other guy was, right? So I can't command high commissions or high royalty rates at my stature. Other people can, and that's why a lot of people will go the Kickstarter route, right? You get to keep a lot more control over it. There's a lot more risk, a lot more work involved in it, none of which has anything to do with game design, which is why I don't really want to go down that route myself, where you'll have a lot more control over how much money you actually make at it. But typically, yeah, if you're getting more, these days you get more than 5%. We got lucky, we had a pretty high percentage, and it's usually on the wholesale of the game, not on the MSRP or any of that type of stuff. So the way pricing typically works is there's the manufacturing price, that's doubled, and that's what goes into the wholesale market, and it's doubled again, and that's what is usually on the sticker price and so on, right? So you usually get a percentage of the wholesale price.
Thank you.
So you're not going to get a percentage on the MSRP. Yeah.
My question.
What's your involvement in the aesthetic, like the outside of the box, in the design of that? Do you have much say in that, or is that more the manufacturers, or do you kind of bounce back and forth?
So there's a couple parts to it. What you're talking about is known as art direction, right? And some publishers will give you a lot of say in that, and others will. One of the things, the games I was working on with Glenn, we were talking about having me do art direction for it, which I'm not really sure I would want to take that on, but a lot of times it is at the hands of the publisher. They're paying for the art. And there's usually a couple different artists involved. There's usually the basic artists. So if you look at bootleggers, for example, this picture here, actually the board is a better example. The picture was painted in watercolor. And you'll see this board on here real quick.
No first tray.
Parts, yeah, there's no parts tray.
No, but there are some
That
it
adds
is
weight.
organized, yeah.
That adds weight.
Oh, that's why, okay.
So if you look at this, you'll see this. This was actually originally painted in watercolor, and then Paul sprinkled salt on it, okay? What was actually painted was just these speakeasies, and that's it. All this additional work on here was all done with a graphic artist. The title work, these are actually 8x5 individual paintings. I've seen them. Paul still has them in the studio someplace. But that is where the graphic arts, the GA comes into play, and that's all the title work, it's the images, and what's interesting is around the edges, there's like a border on this. That border was directly, very, very similar to, this was the original one with bootleggers.
The board you made.
Yeah, this is the one that I made. And you can see that there is some similarities in it. But this is all the artwork. I remember sitting there and we were playtesting, and Paulie was sitting there next to us, and he actually did a hand sketch. I don't know if I have it with me. He did a hand sketch of the box cover while we were sitting there playing. It was just amazing. That's actually how I met you in the first place, was through Paul, anyway. But, you know, there's things like, you know, get into the sculpting. These are our prototype sculpts that were actually made over in China, and then we rolled off of that. So I don't pay for any of that. The publisher pays for all that stuff. And they own all that.
It's something you do negotiate, it is an integral part. So who you pick for your IP to represent you, it really does correlate in the end, you know, to what comes back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is the publisher a lot of times. Like I said, I've dealt with some real doozies where they took my game and ran with it, or Glenn, you know, Extraordinary Voyages was the example. The whole, it's being changed in the name of development, and we have a better way of doing it. You know, listen, I want them to tell me what's wrong with the game, and I'm the designer, I will go fix it. Don't come back and say, well, this is what we think is wrong with it, this is what we're doing to fix it. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So that's another thing from a licensing standpoint. I think you insist as the designer, you get full approval rights over, you know, they may retheme it, they may, you know, kayak cast canoe race, and they say, well, this one will sell better, the art looks better, you know, that's more catching than canoe race. And I tell them. So, yeah.
If they change the game enough, can they own it?
No, you still, and like I said, they own the aesthetics and the artwork and all the production of it. They can own the cover on the book, but they don't own the words in the book, right? So that is still your property, and that's the copyright protection we talked about.
Will you be compensated less though if they did more?
No, but I've tried to work out deals where I've said, okay, we'll help pay for some of that artwork in return for a higher percentage. You know, so there's other deals that you can be made, or I'll you know, particularly now with Kickstarter, it's really popular to take it on the back end. So you say, okay, I will take nothing for the first print run, but on the second print or the subsequent print runs, I'll take, you know, a much higher percentage. So there's lots of little things that you can get into when you start negotiating that. But typically, you know, they have a production budget, and they're going to stick to that production budget. And you know, from artwork and stuff, you just hope it looks good. But a lot of times they do give you a certain amount of say in it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Wasn't that amazing? Takeaways from tonight's meeting that I just want to bullet point and highlight is copyright. Always put that C in that circle, always own it. Make sure that when you go to these play game and these focus groups and putting it out there, that is officially you putting it out in the public domain. That's public space.
Got it? Point it out.
Right there.
Is that
You
what
do
your
your
copyright
Vanna
is?
White as you talk about it.
I love it. And it's like, always, that should be just like you sign your name onto everything. I mean, especially like you, I've through the meetings have told you, sign your name, take your ownership and claim it. That's your stake in the ground. What is it, Peter?
I'm wondering, could we sometime have Ken Johnson and this gentleman
Would
get
you
together?
come back next month? That's the other thing I want to bring
Yeah,
up, because
well-
there's been so much going on. I'm hoping to take a couple
I
minutes.
still got
Do you
3
guys
days worth
want,
of notes.
and we want more question and answers, and we want you to come back. We want to say thank you. This officially makes you an honorary member
Good.
of our group, so please come
Go ahead,
back. And you know, Ken Johnson is scheduled to speak this time next month, so a month from now we have Ken. And Ken, he
I'm going to
can.
sit right next to this guy and ask
He
him.
can
Don't tell him that I'm coming, though. Let's have a little fun.
Oh, no, the group will know that, the group will welcome you all, and And between what Ken does and some of the questions tonight were about licensing,
Yeah.
you're gonna really compliment on that, and we're gonna leapfrog that into next month now. So ask questions tonight, but also, you also get a different perspective and take on a lot of your experiences that will complement this time next month. So come back, bring more people, and help us grow our membership and our fellowship. So we talked about copywriting, the Kickstarter. And I know this is me speaking personally and now giving advice to the group. That scares me. And early on, when you mentioned the Kickstarter, there's a risk and reward. So it's like very, very risky. If you find that unicorn that you launch out there and you capture, yeah, you could get a real higher return. But just realize the risks are really, really daunting in my view.
Yeah, the general wisdom, this is what some of my friends have been telling me, you have to have about a $3,000 budget to make it splash on Kickstarter. There's so much on Kickstarter now.
Yeah.
So many paid reviews, there's so many influencers that you're paying them, Dice Tower folks, the Funk Houses, those guys. You're sending them copies, you're paying them to play it and talk about it.
So I want to build on
yeah,
that
it's rough.
Kickstarter conversation, because earlier this past month, I've been at a lot of meet and greets and Inventor community that overlap in Detroit. So I was at an event in downtown Detroit that was the place where they do the coding right in Grand Circus. And there were questions about Kickstarter, and I got up in front of that group and also said, hey, when it comes to Kickstarter, here's my real big caution to anybody who will listen to the sound of my voice. And that is, once you go online, it's the wild, wild west, and you go global. And there are thousands of sets of eyes offshore, like China, Korea, anywhere. Could be Africa, anywhere. And once you put it out there into cyberspace and in the public domain, the thing is, they have big operations, especially in China, that within a week, they can come up with cheap knockoffs that are going to compete. So then what you do is you compete with yourself. You've created so much unfair competition that it's not a very economically successful way if you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this to get that. And there are strategies, and especially an organized group of like, it's not just him. They're partners, they're well thought out, you bring decades of experience. And so like he can do this probably with 20K. I wouldn't recommend that to a novice.
Well, there's companies that have bootstrapped themselves.
Oh, sure.
Stonemeyer Games is probably one of the most notorious. Stonemeyer with Scythe and some of those products. They were a nothing company, and they successfully promoted that. Jamie Stegmeyer has a blog on Kickstarter, and he's literally wrote the book on how to do Kickstarter games.
Well, there we go. Now, somebody really wants to search this guy's name on Kickstarter and tap into that blog. You've got a how-to?
Yeah, he's got a ton of how-tos on that.
Yeah.
The thing that I've seen though is losing it in shipping. So some of these places, like if you want to ship a game to Australia, for example, it'll cost you $75 to ship a $40 game.
Yeah, you got to factor in all those variables.
So how do you actually go on to research on Kickstarter?
I've backed, don't tell my wife, but I've backed over 130 Kickstarters myself. And I've been either part of usually
You confess to a room full of people and you won't tell your wife.
about 3 or 4 different Kickstarters myself.
That's hilarious.
I've been part of it.
So if I
I think
wanted
she
to
wanted to
just
know
look
about
into
that
it to get more information about it,
Oh,
what would I do?
Stegmeyer.
There's a game maker named Stegmeyer, so if you can go on to Kickstarter,
Would you spell that, please?
you're gonna have to ask him.
Right now.
I'll find it.
He's Googling it for you.
Okay, thank you.
And you get connected with that blog. He's basically, you can spend a month going through all his blogs, and I'm sure that it will give you the information some way, shape, or form that you're seeking. I want to tell you what I did today. I know we're Blue Devil country here, but I got invited by the Maize and Blue, and I got to tour the Innovation Labs, which is actually a library in Ann Arbor. And so the labs I got to see today are prototyping and fabrication, and it's all under the auspices of a library on the U of M campus. It turns out there's 13 research libraries in Ann Arbor alone. And they've turned one of them into a space where it has a production, a high-quality production theater where they can make Hollywood-type movies. They can do the Fab Lab, and they can also, provide engineering and students. So now we have a connection, and they will make available anybody who wants to print 3D printing for free. So that's a cool perk for membership, because you're in the network of the knowing and the interesting. And there's been a lot of events, and then one other event I want to promote is today on LinkedIn. Denise, our educational outreach coordinator for the USPTO, she just posted, so if you search Denise Sylvester, USPTO, April 25th, which is next week, is Design Day, and it's a whole day seminar being put out by Alexandria, Virginia, the main USPTO, but when you sign up, you can view it and participate online through our Elijah J. McCoy satellite. So that's really good stuff coming up. A month from now, we've got Ken Johnson. And does anybody else want to add to the list of activities? I know next month, Jerry, we had an advice, and we were also going to try and layer in tonight's meeting. Jerry, who I want to introduce you to, is our new treasurer-elect. We're still reviewing bylaws. We're trying to get the bylaws reviewed for open vote next month. God willing, all these things will converge within the next 4 weeks, but we've got a lot of people off on vacation. We've got Mary Cordovan, we've got David Cohn, and Ken Yee. So we've got 3 board members off. So we're trying to, converge again. But then we're hoping and we're asking for this input this month. If there's any questions or concerns about membership, bylaws, the slate of board of directors that we will formally adopt, give us some input. That's why we're asking for emails and trying to have this two-way communication to facilitate that. Also, we want to, with next month's meeting, really launch, and I also want to introduce, stand up please. This is Jack, John Pirate. Mary Cordovan and I met Jack a year ago when we were all judges for the Invention Convention, the National Invention Convention held at the Henry Ford. And then at one of these Detroit meetup events a couple weeks ago, Jack said, I met you there this year. So I've got to engage with him. We met here at Lawrence Tech. When I say we layered in Jerry, and 2 hours later, almost 3 hours later, of mentoring. So Jack recently graduated with mechanical engineering at Wayne State, and he ran the Innovation Center there. So we are blessed to give a little time and attention from him to hold up the little, he is now armed with a very cool little tablet and keyboard and PC, and he's really going to help us by this time next month be a little more to improve our online presence, as you see the work that Jerome did with the video, and so we're going to start categorizing as a resource our meetings. So these are really, really good things. And one more thing I'm going to ask, put that C with the copyright at the bottom.
The other thing that
Thank you.
other piece of advice was in your design notebook, leave a space at the bottom so somebody else can witness and say, I witnessed this.
That's really good advice.
So that was from an IP lawyer when I talked to them.
See? Pearls of wisdom. Thank you. Yes, and let me just promote our new visitor tonight, Sean. He's a patent attorney from West Bloomfield. He's wrote some internet policy, why internet should be free for all, and he wrote the mandate.
The Internet for All platform that Abdul Saeed had for the last.
Yeah, you're the author of that platform. Yes. So, welcome. And why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us what you'd like to share with our group?
Well, it was just a short point that I wanted to make on the copyright. You really should not just put that C on there, but make sure to file it with the Library of Congress. If you don't get statutory damages. statutory damages are really important on preventing infringement.
Nailed in.
This, from your lips to God's ear, yes.
So,
This.
and it's easy, it's cheap, it's not
And
that
I'm a
expensive.
layperson, not an of councils, but, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, very good value added.
We actually do that with bootleggers.
Library of Congress, yeah. It'll require a submission, it's like $100 for the filing fee or something like that, it's really not
I
that
think it
expensive.
costs.
Joe, you had a question?
I haven't filed one in a while. so
10
I'm just
years
kinda-
ago, it was just like mailed in to the Copyright Office. The UST,
Wait,
USPTO or whatever.
I copyright music a lot. It's $35, music and writing. So it's $35 for that. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, Joe has got some really good experience with that.
No,
Thank you
sorry,
for
sorry.
sharing.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's fine, you said
So-
$35.
Well, I
Continue to
copyright
network,
what I
continue to
write.
fellowship.
$35
You know, I like
Understood.
to feed you guys, so there's sweet and savory and drinks and let's do this a little more informal so I can tell Jerry to kill the tables. Thank you.
Nah.
Make sure you separate.